So, welcome one and all to another special episode of What's the Day Live. Today, I have with me the wonderful Miss Martina Clark, who's uh, a great volunteer and has been in this field on the occasion of World AIDS Day. She's a survivor of HIV/AIDS, and she's been in working with the UN, and she's also an author of the wonderful book of My Unexpected Life. It's a great memoir about her life through two different diseases and a pandemic. And so, before we get into this, I'll just give you a brief about what World AIDS Day is, where it came from, and then probably we get into the nits and gritties of the whole thing. So, World
Perfect.
Day is observed on December 1st each year and is dedicated to raising awareness about HIV/AIDS pandemic, mourning those who have died from the disease, and celebrating the progress that we've made, that the community and the scientific people have made in the prevention, treatment, and care of those living with HIV. This day is an opportunity for people to unite in the fight against HIV, to show support for those who are living with it, and to commemorate those who have lost their lives to this disease. It was first celebrated in 1988. Soon after, it was first discovered in 1981. And Martina here has been surviving, going through it, I think, as far as I've read, 1996. Am I correct?
92.
I'm really sorry, 92.
That's okay.
So I'll pass it on to you, Martina. Probably you could tell about yourself better.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me, first of all. So I'm Martina Clark, and I have been living with HIV for 31 years. World AIDS Day is turning, I guess, 35 this year. And so I have celebrated as a person with HIV, all but 3 of them, I think. And I was looking back at the timeline, and I thought it was interesting that in the year I tested positive in 1992, the theme was AIDS. Get it right? A community commitment.
Okay.
So I think that was sort of a rallying call for communities of all sorts to get involved back in the day before we had treatment. And then the theme this year is let communities lead. So all these years later, we're still thinking about how communities should be involved, and finally, I think acknowledging that community members should be leading a lot of the work we do.
Right. So I've got this tradition of putting the first question for my invitees. So, but then it's not exactly, because the question that I asked them is that did you know about the day itself before I asked you? But I guess it's not relevant here. So I know, when was the first time you heard about World AIDS Day?
So that's a great question. When I tested positive, I was living in San Francisco in California. I lived there for many, many years, which is irrelevant to the story, except for the fact that San Francisco was one of the hardest hit cities in the United States, San Francisco and New York. And there was a great response to the pandemic there. And so people did a lot of work, did a lot of things to try and get people's attention. And so World AIDS Day was absolutely celebrated. Celebrated is not exactly the right word. Commemorated, right. I think, certainly back then, because it was too soon to have been celebrating advances, but we were commemorating the people we had lost and trying to raise awareness. So I was aware of it probably from the first year that it was became an international holiday, not holiday, international day of recognition.
Right.
But I was aware, and I had a lot of friends, a lot of gay men who were friends who had HIV. But to be honest, I didn't really see myself in that. And so I think that I'm sure that I marched in a couple of things on World AIDS Day. I remember doing that, and I'm pretty sure I did that before I tested positive. But I was definitely not as involved as I became in 1992.
So how did the experience change? I mean, standing for others and then standing for yourself as well, and probably bringing people together for the cause.
Yeah, it was very surreal, I think is the best way to say that, because again, it was something I was aware of around me, but I had never seen a woman with HIV that I knew of. I probably had, but I did not know that I had. And so I was just sort of felt like I was the only woman probably on the entire planet Earth to get HIV. I didn't have a reference point. And this, the commemoration of World AIDS Day early on was very much centered around gay men, and rightfully so in San Francisco, because that was the hardest hit community, to be sure. But so I didn't really see myself belonging. Um, and it felt very strange to be changing the words to support people with HIV and know that that suddenly,
Yourself.
I think it took me a while for it to really absorb. Also, because I was one of those really lucky people that I didn't get sick for a very, very long time. So I was tested positive. I had HIV. I was not in denial, but my body wasn't manifesting anything yet. So it just felt like this is somebody else's thing, but it's not my thing because my doctor told me it's my thing now. And it took a while to align those messages. And I think that things like World AIDS Day are both, I have a very mouthy, loud cat in the background. Sorry if she tries to weigh in on World AIDS Day. But, but I think taking part in those events was both scary in a way, because I realized I'm a part of this very big thing that people have to make a lot of noise about. But also it felt very comforting to know I was not alone. Indeed, there were many, many millions, as we know now, millions of people with HIV.
So you've basically seen, I mean, the virus itself was discovered in 1983 and 1984 by two different scientists independently. But then you've basically seen the whole development process of the whole medical field going through from the discovery to where we are today. How have you seen the medicines change, or how has your experience changed for someone living with HIV today? How would you say that the struggle is much better today, probably, or is it not?
Oh, it is. It certainly, in terms of the science, it's a gazillion times better. Because when I was tested positive in 92, we didn't have any treatment. So my doctor, even though I was like generally still very healthy, my doctor's like, you know, you probably have like 5 years to live. I was 28 years old. So I was like, what? I'm supposed to have my whole future and decades ahead of me. And the medicines that we did have early on were very toxic. So a lot of people built resistance to future medicines. They got sick from those things. They developed other side effects, things that couldn't be treated maybe. So it was very, very complicated.
Right.
And very desperate, because there was no sense like, you know, you just start taking meds and it'll be fine. And then in 96, the cocktail, as we now call it, became available. And it was still early, but it seemed to be promising. And then as time went on, it was clearer and clearer that that worked. And so the lifespan now is, you know, it's considered a chronic manageable disease. So there's no more of this, you have 2 years to live or 5 years to live, automatically death sentence sort of language. That said, I think that taking medicine is still not easy.
Right.
And I think that if we get away from the science, there's still a lot of stigma. There's a lot of other stuff around HIV. But for sure, the scientists have been doing their work and doing very well. And now we have a whole new issue of people who are long-term survivors like myself, who've had HIV for 20, 30, 40 years. And we're all getting old, and we never thought we would. It's both wonderful, but also kind of like, what does this mean? And it's a fascinating thing to go through.
Right.
It's also challenging because we don't really know, like, what's the impact of all the medications for all these years.
Mm-hmm.
There's some scientists that think that for all of the years you were not on treatment, it ages you an extra 6 months. So in my case, I would be like in my late 60s, even though I'm not actually 60 yet.
Okay.
So my body is perhaps aging faster than like my sister's. It's a very strange thing, and nobody really knows. But science has definitely done great things, and it's much, much better now than in 92. And people who have tested positive should absolutely feel confident that the drugs work. They really do make a difference.
So thanks for putting that out. I mean, this is the first time I am talking to someone with who is HIV/AIDS positive. And you mentioned stigma in your memoir just now. So coming to the stigma itself, you worked with UNAIDS starting since 1986, and you're the first person probably to have been openly HIV positive and then join the UNAIDS program. And then but still there was the stigma attached to the daily living, daily life that you had, and then you had this work that you were doing. So where was this whole story weaving around? I mean, how did your family take it? And then
My family, for the most part, were really great. I have to say that, again, it was scary times and nobody knew, and they all thought I was going to die, and I thought I was going to die, and eventually we will all die. But at the time, it was a very complicated time for my family. But my siblings in particular were just spectacular. They have been there, and they are still there to support me. I had some friends who were not so great, who I told, and they cried and they said, "I'm so sorry to hear that." And then I never saw them again. And I think even to this day, 30 something years later, I still find it hard to tell people, which is ridiculous because I've written a whole book about it, right? It's not like it's a secret, but I still have this fear on a one-to-one level that I will be, rejected, or people will see me differently, because I think that happens, and I found that with my work, that I would go and lead a training, for example, and I was, the person sent from New York headquarters to do a training in a country. Right. And that was all great. And the minute I disclosed that I had HIV, then suddenly everything changed. People looked at me differently, and they're like, "Who is this woman? She's not who I expect to be the person with HIV." Yeah. So on one hand, it was good. It challenged people's stereotypes. But on the other hand, I definitely felt people changed the way that they interacted with me. I feel it less today. And I don't know if that's because I'm older and I just don't care anymore what people think, or if I'm used to it, or if society truly has changed. I would like to think that society has started to change and that people are much more accepting and sort of realize it's a virus. Viruses don't discriminate. People shouldn't either. I'm not 100% we're totally there yet, but we're closer than we were, I think.
In terms of the efforts that the community is making, in terms of the efforts that you people have been making in trying to create awareness around this, we talk about prevention strategies, we talk about engagement, we talk about initiatives that the UN is taking. But then what truly drives the idea into people's mind? What do you think is the one thing that drives the idea into people's mind? Is it the fear, or is it actually the feeling of community that, okay, there are people living with us with this?
That's a good question. I mean, do you mean what drives the stigma, or what?
I mean, there's one thing that's driving the stigma, but there's one thing that's driving consideration in people's mind, that, okay, we have to have some consideration, and they're also equals. Like, we should not be treating these people differently.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I think there, the really important thing is for people to stand up and say, I have HIV, and put a face to the statistics. And of course, that's really hard to do. And it's a hard thing to ask people to do, because once you tell people, you cannot get that information back. It's out there. But the more people do that, the more people disclose their status, the more normal it becomes. The less you're like that one strange person in the crowd. It's sort of like, okay, this is normal. I know people. They know people. We all know people. It's not the end of the world. So I think that is the thing that really starts to shift minds, because once you know a person with HIV, unless you're some sort of a terrible monster, you kind of like, oh, okay, now I know a person with HIV, and it's really not a big deal. I either like the person or I don't like the person, but it's not because they have HIV. It's because it's just who they are, right? And so the more people can interact and also have people with HIV represented in media, for example, in movies, in TV shows, and plays, the more it becomes normal that people just see this is just something people have. And then it's less frightening to think about it yourself and to talk about it with others. And I think that makes a big difference. And I also noticed in my years as a trainer with the UN that, like, one way to always get people to open up to being in a training was to say that even if you don't need this information yourself, it will help you to teach the children in your life, whether your own kids or brothers or sisters or some other kids that you care about. And as soon as you like just shift the focus a little bit off of the individual, then they feel like, okay, I'll listen to this. I'll be in the room with people with HIV, because it's really for the benefit of the other people, the kids that I care about. That made a huge difference as well.
And so we'll go a step back and say, how did we deal with the stigma here? I mean, there was something that was happening 20 years ago, and there's something that's happening today. And through the COVID-19 pandemic, there was one stigma that was associated with the people who were suffering with the coronavirus. And then there's the added stigma that comes with the immunodeficiency syndrome. So where do these two stigmas collide? Probably because it's like you want to stay, there is fear in people's mind. Okay, I might get it, but you actually don't just get it, right? I mean, you don't just acquire the whole disease. So how did you deal with this?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, that, as you said, the way that, you can just get COVID because you were in an elevator with somebody who has it, or in a small room, whatever, right? Office or school. HIV is not like that. You have to work much harder to get HIV. It is only through bodily fluids that are not transmitted in the air. So there's a very big difference there. And yet, I think that the stigma where it overlaps is maybe in the long COVID, because now there are people who had COVID, like a gazillion other people, but aren't better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where maybe it overlaps more than anything, because then they become people who people see as sick. And the minute somebody sees you as a person who is sick, as disabled, then you are something other, because they don't want to be sick. They don't want to be disabled. And so they sort of like put up a little bit of a wall, or they think that you are less capable to just be in the world. The fact that you might need special accommodations suddenly becomes a hassle for other people, rather than just saying, okay, this person is just as bright and smart and capable as they used to be. We just need to give them, a little bit of leeway if they need to be 5 minutes late for work or something like that. Those sorts of things. I think that those are commonalities between any kind of serious long-term illness. Another place where it sort of overlaps, not exactly stigma, but kind of stigma, is that we still don't have all the answers.
Mhm.
You know, we don't have the answers for everything, but for example, if a person has some kind of a cancer, in theory, we know that we can treat them with chemotherapy, we can do radiation, it should work, the person hopefully goes into remission. There's sort of a logical plan that we know about. With COVID, nobody has a clue how to deal with the long-term effects. And HIV, we know a lot more than we do about COVID, that we still don't know that much. We're still figuring it out as we go along. And, there's still a lot of research being done. Things we still don't know about women's bodies, if they react differently in the long term to the medications, or how menopause impacts things. There are a lot of things that we're still researching, and living with something that people don't understand presents its own sort of stigma of, I don't know how to talk to you. I don't know what the language is to deal with this. And I think that those are a couple of ways that it overlaps in my mind.
And have you ever been treated as, because you mentioned the word disabled, have you ever been treated as a person with some disability just because you mentioned that you have AIDS?
Yeah, I mean, I have long before I ever had any illness associated with HIV, definitely people were sort of like, I was a frail little delicate flower that was going to break if they, sneezed or something. People, suggested that I used to travel a lot with the UN for my job, for example. And people would say things like, I assume you always get a wheelchair when you're in the airport. And I can still walk. I just have HIV, and it's a great thing that people can do that, but I didn't need it at the time. If I ever do, I will be the first one to get one. But there was an assumption that because I had HIV, I must already be sick. And even if I wasn't demonstrating it, people were like almost trying to make me act like I was sick. And that was a very strange thing to happen, because I was in my 20s and early 30s when I was first dealing with all of this. And, logically in our brains, that doesn't happen till you're 70 or something. Right. And so people were treating me like I was just damaged. There was something wrong with me. I needed something extra, when I really just needed people to treat me like a normal person.
Right. So when we talk about your 20s and 30s, there are a lot of people dealing with it. There are some kids that are born with it. That's a different whole story altogether.
Mm-hmm.
But then somebody who's contracted it just right now, I mean, in the recent past, what would be your one or two tidbits to give them, probably for their life ahead, or something that you would want to tell your younger self? I don't know if you got that question earlier or not, but
Yeah, I actually wrote a whole play about talking to my younger self, like writing a letter to myself from me now to Martina, who's just testing positive. And I think that what I would say to myself and to somebody testing now would be, absolutely try and find other people living with HIV. You don't necessarily have to go public and be, a spokesperson, but find other people living with HIV, either in person or virtually, because getting to know other people will help you understand things that they have gone through that maybe are similar. It will help you know that you're not alone. It will give you somebody you could talk to who understands the same things that you're dealing with. And that's really important, because even the best intended friends and family, they don't really get it unless they have been through that particular thing. So finding other people with HIV makes a huge difference. And then the other thing I think would be to educate yourself, because there's so much information out there, but you need to make sure you get the right information. But make sure that you know what the disease is, how it manifests, so you can watch out for things yourself, but also so you can make sure your doctor is doing what they need to be doing, because sometimes if they're not a specialist, they might dismiss you. They might think, oh, this is not that important, or treat you wrong, in which case you should feel empowered because you have the knowledge to say, you know what, I need a new doctor. Things like that. So it's really important to find a community of people with HIV and find as much information as you can so you can manage your own healthcare efficiently.
Great. Probably one of the last questions that I put to you, but let's talk about your book, Your Unexpected Life. What's one thing that people should look forward to when reading it?
Oh, a lot of travel.
Ah,
It's I think if there's a sort of very short version is that it's about my life with HIV, but also how I ended up kind of unexpectedly, hence the title, working at the United Nations very early on and having a career that I had never imagined I would have, which led me to so much travel. I've been to, I think, more than 90 countries, which is a privilege. And so some of the stories are funny about some of the travel stuff, but also about how a small group of us, when I started working for UNICEF a few years after UNAIDS, a group of us from other organizations in the UN, we actually created an internal HIV education program internal to the United Nations systems to educate all staff and personnel all over the world and, in 120 countries. And it was a massive undertaking. But to me, what I hope the reader takes away is that one person plus one person plus one person, even just a small group of people who are stubborn and determined, they can actually make a difference and make a change for the better. I think that's the important thing, is that even when you're confronting what seems like the most impossible scenario, you can still change the way that the world is around you and make it better for other people and yourself.
okay. Now, this is a question that just came up in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the one difference that you think that your life has made in the world? I mean, it's a huge question to ask, but I don't know how I
Yeah.
simple.
That my life has made. I think if I've done anything, it is that, and again, this is in large part because I was afforded the opportunity to be in so many different places. But I think meeting other people with HIV in countries, and even here, meeting other people with HIV who had never met another person with
Right.
HIV who thought they were alone, like I had thought I was alone. I think that giving them the chance to feel connected, that's what made a difference and maybe shifted a few people's lives. I hope so anyway.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, I couldn't think about something that, I mean, from one person to having dealt with so many people and spreading the message around and creating the sense of community is probably the most important thing, probably. And then I'm from my little perspective that I have on this issue, I just want to say that I hope I did not ask you a question that probably hurt you or something. Just
Oh no, this has been great.
thanks a lot. I mean, thanks a lot for joining me in and on this episode of, I call it What's the Day, simply because every new day brings a new perspective. Every new day has a different purpose to what the whole world is bringing to it. Today it was World AIDS Day. Tomorrow it could be banks or probably some other disease and things like that, because a lot
Yeah,
of things coming up in the world. So
absolutely.
once again, thanks a lot for joining me in. And for the listeners, do leave your comments. And if you have anything else in your mind, if you want some other day to be talked about, we'll probably bring it up next time. Thanks a lot for joining. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.